Designing classroom language learning games, or how I learned to stop worrying and love the quiz. I'm going to talk for a bit about my experiences designing and developing language learning games, and talk about the lessons I've learned and how my design philosophy has evolved over time. I'd like to try to elucidate some of the challenges that developers face bringing language learning games to the market. Let's get started. So back in 2010, when I first got interested in language learning games and I began researching and designing games, I thought by this time, and this is early 2015, that the market would be awash with language learning games, and kids and young adults and adults would be spending those drill and kill years playing games, being engaged by games. I set out designing big, immersive, fantastic games because I expected that this is where the market would be in a relatively short period of time. And to this date, this is early 2015, there are exactly zero language learning games that are available for learners and teachers in the classrooms. By games, I should clarify, I mean games, not gamified activities and not simulations. And I'm talking specifically about games for secondary ed and adult education settings. There are a variety of games for young learners, very, very simple games, and that's not really what I'm talking about here. And also games that are commercially viable. So there are a lot of reasons why we would expect to see games on the market already, and I'd like to talk about a few of those. Game-based solutions are particularly well suited for language learning, and I'd like to cover a couple of those points and talk about why we think they should be there. So by most accounts, language learning should be the low-hanging fruit of learning games, right along with mathematics. And there are a variety of reasons for that, and let me talk about a few of them here. The first is exposition. It may be sort of counterintuitive, but language learning requires very little exposition compared to a lot of other subjects that are being taught through learning games. Most subjects, like science and history, require quite a bit of knowledge about a context or background information or explanation of concepts that has to come through exposition. And this is an anathema to games, because games are about action. They're not about receptive activities like listening or reading about information. Right. Language learning is, as I said, it's actually low exposition, and this is what I mean. So here's a simple game. There's a cat. Tap on the cat. Oh, good job. Gee, the cat's sad. Oh, maybe she's hungry. Can you find some food for the cat? Why don't you look behind that apple? Yeah, great work. We don't have to have a lot of explanation about the dietary habits of felines or anything like that to get right involved in the game. We can immediately start listening or speaking or acting based on our ability to use the language. So a second reason why games are particularly well suited for language learning is automaticity, which is a real problem, especially in a foreign language context. That is, developers have a very difficult time getting to a stage in which they can understand and produce language quickly and fluently. Well, this is the primary thing that games teach us. They teach us how to take a particular skill or a particular concept and automatize it. So, for example, Super Mario Brothers is about jumping. It's a game about jumping. And what you learn in the game, what you become very fluent at doing in the game, is jumping. All right, so jump, Mario. Great. Oh, watch out for the Goomba. Unlike a lot of other subjects that are actually covered and actually dealt with very well in games, the goal for language learners is to develop their automaticity, and games are already well suited for that. So a third reason why we would expect to see language learning games out there, and again, this one is also a little bit counterintuitive, but it's mechanics. Mechanics are the sort of core action you do in a game. And so, for example, again with Super Mario Brothers, it's a jumping mechanic. It's a platformer game in which what you mostly do is jump in the game. Well, communication is a kind of mechanic. So communicating is an action that you do, and it actually pairs very well with a lot of things that we're seeing in commercial games. There are a lot of commercial games that are using a communication mechanic already. Here's some examples of them. So you might be familiar with Telltale Games' Walking Dead. Hugely successful, hugely popular game, fantastic game, very engaging, based on the comic book series and the TV show The Walking Dead. And this is an adventure game in which all of the decisions that you make are based on dialogue choices, right? So in this case, we, the protagonists, we're talking to this girl, and we have three choices of things that we can say. That white bar that you see right above the text boxes, that's a timer. So we have a limited amount of time to make a decision, and our choices here will shape how the game unfolds. So your ability to read, to make decisions quickly, and to communicate your ideas and your intentions is very important. Here's another example from the same game, and in this dialogue, you can see where your understanding of pragmatics also comes into play. You are essentially saying the same thing, but you're saying it at either a different register or a different tone, and depending on how you speak to the other characters in your game, your relationships with them will change. Here's another game that just came out. This is a Square Enix game, and in this game you are a high school student with paranormal activities, and it's a very similar structure to the Walking Dead game. Here's an example of choices in this game. You can quote John Lennon, or you can answer in two different ways, but what's most important is that you can understand this language and react very quickly to it. Again, this is a perfect example of developing automaticity. There are other points in the game where it's not through dialogue necessarily, but your actions in the game. So understanding the difference between make fun of and comfort. Discourse just came out a couple of weeks ago. This is a really neat game where you are one of a group of survivors of a plane crash stranded on a desert island. And again, like the other games, you are making choices that are based almost entirely on the dialogue. So in this case, you have to decide whether or not to kick somebody out of your group because they've made a mistake. And so we can see that communication, or your understanding of language, your ability to use language, can be used as a mechanic in games and in very engaging ways. So finally, the fourth reason why we feel like we should be seeing these games is the language learning industry. It's a huge industry globally. It's got it's about an $80 billion a year industry with a really robust digital product market. There are a lot of big players, a lot of established, venerable publishers who have a huge portfolio of digital products, both for educational settings, but also direct to end users, as well as any number of hungry young startups developing all kinds of innovative tools for language learning. And so you'd think, well, given this context, somebody out there must be doing language learning games. And hopefully they are, but they haven't put anything out yet, at least anything more than gamified activities. So before I start talking about the challenges and the problems of designing games, I'd like to give a shout out to Mike, Leo, and Blaine. These are the bright young minds over at Subverses. And what they are doing is they're creating a language learning game. They're focused now on Spanish and French as foreign languages for the American market. And in the game that they're creating, you play as a corporate spy. And what you do is you infiltrate a different corporation and eavesdrop on conversations, and you use your knowledge of the people in that corporation in order to perform particular actions. And it's very well designed. This is one of the first games that I've seen that I feel very confident about. And they're just about to release their beta, and they're looking for beta testers. So head on over to Subverses and sign up for their beta testing program. Okay, so let's talk about the challenges and the incongruities of developing for the language learning classroom. By challenges, what I essentially mean is the putting together the pieces of the puzzle, figuring out how to operate in this very complex environment. And by incongruities, what I mean is the difficulty of fitting games and, well, developing and designing games that fit into the curriculum. The short answer to this video is that it's incredibly difficult for teachers and administrators to put games into the classroom because essentially they don't fit into the curriculum, at least many of the ones that have been developed so far. But what we need to do is we need to find a way to fit those games in so that teachers can use them in the classroom. And whereas challenges are things that will be overcome relatively quickly, the problem of developing games for a curriculum is really tough. It's really hard to develop something that can be passed off to teachers around the world in the current context that we're in. So let's start with some of those challenges first. Number one on the challenge list. Oh, and then many of these are pretty well known, but I think we should go over them. Learning games is an immature industry. In social media years, it seems like forever that we've been talking about learning games and language learning games. But in real terms, in real people years, it's still a very short period of time. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I'm just now to the point where I feel like I can confidently design games. I'm not the sharpest hammer on the block. I'm sure other people could do it more quickly, but the truth is designing is a profession, and it takes a lot of time to understand the complex situation that we have in the education industry. On top of that, learning games is predominantly a North American industry, and language learning is maybe not the top of the priorities. So if we had more developers in Asia, South America, or Europe, then we would be seeing more of these games, and eventually we will. A second really difficult challenge is platform ambiguity. So if you asked people 3 years ago what tools teachers would be using in their classrooms, everybody would have said iPads, tablets, and they would have been wrong. We see since last year that Chromebooks are outselling iPads, and they're going to continue outselling iPads for a variety of reasons. And it's really difficult for developers, because we in the education settings we're reliant on these contracts. It's very difficult to be able to build something when it may turn out that the platform is going to change 2 years down the road. And so, for example, one of the problems with these Chromebooks is they don't run Unity games. Unity is one of the most popular game engines for developing games, and the Chromebooks don't support them. And this creates, as you might imagine, a huge number of problems for developers. Third challenge is trying to develop for a context in which you have to have long-term commitments. Of course, game developers want to create a community, and they want to support their games indefinitely, as long as they can. But that's very different than signing a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year contract. And that creates a lot of risk. That, coupled with unproven ROI and I don't knows, makes even the most risk-taking of developers very worried. ROI is return on investment, and there are so many I don't knows about developing for the education setting that it's very difficult to attract investment. It's very difficult to decide how much commitment you can have towards a particular game. So, for example, how many language learners have access to technology around the world? I don't know. I would say roughly 500,000. How many of them play games? I don't know. More than last year. How many teachers are willing to use games in their classrooms? I don't know. And there are so many of these that it makes it quite scary to think about getting into this full time. So for a lot of the indie developers and a lot of the developers making commercial games, this is the reason why they're not entering the education field, right? Because you have to have that specific learning games skill set and an understanding of the learning games market. And then the fifth challenge, which is kind of surprising, is really a lack of language learning pedagogy. And we talk a lot about how teachers don't have design skills, but it also goes the other way. There are a number of developers out there who have put out games, and I'll show you an example in a minute. But there are a number of developers out there who have created games, but their games fail because they don't have a good understanding about the way that languages are learned or taught, or how to structure a language learning activity. So here's a quick example. Here's a game called Spell Up. It's a browser-based game in which you hear words and then you spell them. And in a lot of ways, the design is wonderful. It's got great aesthetics. The interactions are very engaging. It's beautiful. The pacing is wonderful. It's great. Got great user onboarding. But it fails miserably as a language learning game for a couple of really basic reasons. The first is, like a lot of developers, they try to use ASR, automatic speech recognition, which doesn't work. And so in this game, you're supposed to say the letters as you spell the word. So WOODWORK. And it's incredibly frustrating, even for native speakers, and absolutely untenable for language learners. There is a keyboard input that you can do, but it's sort of hidden away in the settings, and they don't really bring that out. And then the other problem you can see on the screen is that the vocabulary items have been chosen willy-nilly. We have cove and woodwork in here with use and die. And I played a game where the prompt was shoot, and I typed out the word SHOOT, and I got it wrong because they were looking for CHUTE. And this is surprisingly common for the few language learning games that have been put out, unfortunately. Okay, so those are some of the challenges. Let's talk about the incongruities. So the good folks over at the Sesame Street Workshop put out a study last year about the integration of games in K through 8. And this was the results of the survey question asking, what are the barriers to using games? And what problems do you have using games? And I should mention that games are actually quite common in K through 8. It's a lot easier to design for those age ranges. The games are much simpler. Most of the games are math or like arithmetic games, spelling games, things like that. And anyway, so here's the results. And looking at these, we can see. You can get an idea of what the problem is. So, cost, lack of tech resources, not sure where to find quality games, and unfamiliar with the technology. These are really challenges. The costs are coming down, and teachers are more acquainted with using games. These are problems that will be resolved relatively soon. Not too much to worry about. But these other three, insufficient time, not sure how to integrate games, and games don't fit into the curriculum, these are very difficult challenges for developers to face. And actually, I mean, the 20% is games don't fit into the curriculum, but all three of these are talking about the inability to integrate games. Insufficient time, meaning there are no games that have been built that can replace whatever activity is necessary, or there's just too many other things that have to be done during that class period, and there is no space for games. And what we have to understand as developers is that this is not going to change. Education systems change very slowly, and there are legitimate reasons for this problem. And this is the big obstacle for developers, is figuring out how to make games that will be that puzzle piece in the curriculum. So let's talk about a few games. Here are some games that I made. This is case study number 1. This is 4-letter words. It's a iOS game that I put out some time back. It's no longer being developed, being supported now, but it should run on your iPhone 6. Go out, give it a shot. This is a word game that I made for the Japanese English language learning market. And what you do in this game is you start with a 4-letter start word. In this case, it's phase. And you change that word 1 letter at a time until you get to the target word, kick. So in this case, the player, with a few mistakes in there, has made the words phase, days, dare, dark, park, pack, pick, and if they select K at pick, then they will complete the level and have solved the puzzle. And it's a groovy game. It's fun. It's my intention with it was to sort of break out of the grid of word games and provide something with a sort of an organic feel to it. It didn't sell well, and here's why. When I talked to learners, users of the games, and these were teenage, early 20s Japanese learners, these were the kinds of things they said. I played for maybe 2 hours, it's fun, I was challenged to use my brain, but it's just a game, so I didn't learn anything. Which is sort of funny because, I set out trying to make a game where you could play and you wouldn't even know that you were learning. And so I guess I really accomplished my goal because more often than not, the users reported this sense of not having felt like they learned anything. It sort of didn't pass the educational smell test, right? Particularly in Japan, but I think this applies everywhere. Learning looks like tests. It looks like quizzes. It looks hard. There's an assessment at the end, right? There's some sort of a score or maybe a metric that tells you that you've succeeded, or more often than not, you've failed. So in this case, whereas I got pretty good feedback from teachers, it didn't fit in the learner's curriculum, right? Because it didn't seem like learning to them. Let's go to case study number 2. This is Buzzu Buzzu. Buzzu Buzzu is a communicative cooperative games suite. These are tablet-based games in which you play face-to-face with your partners in a classroom, and you get it's essentially an infogap activity. Each player has information specific to their scene in their game, and they accomplish the goals of the games by exchanging information with their partners, and they talk over the game instead of through the game. The game doesn't actually do anything in regards to tracking or assessing or doing anything with their actual language. Their teammates are listening, and if they're speaking quickly enough or well enough or correctly, then their classmates will be able to understand them. There are 12 games in the suite. And I'll give you an example of how the games are played. So this is Crazy Cleanup, and in Crazy Cleanup, one of the players in the game, his parents have left for the weekend. And so they threw a great big party, trashed the house, everything is a mess, and the parents called and said, hey, we canceled our trip, we're coming back home, we'll be back in 10 minutes. And the players have 10 minutes in order to clean up the entire house. And the way that the game works is all of the players are in different rooms of the house. We're looking at the big square is player A's interface, and she's G-Min, and she's in the kitchen, and that's the room. She has her information bar down there at the bottom, and up at the top are the pass-receive zones for the other players. And what happens is the other players drag something on their screen, and it comes into her screen, and or she passes things to the other players by dragging things to their zone. And then the other players have their own separate interfaces, right, with their own information on it. So this is sort of how it works in gameplay. So number one, player A is prompted to assign a task. Right, they see this on their screen, and so number two, G-Min says, put the fish back in the fish tank. And the player with the fish tank, Tiffany, at number three, looks on her screen and realizes that she needs 3 fish. So she says, I need 3 fish. You can see G-Min has a fish on her counter, so when she hears Tiffany say that, she can pass her one of the fish. And then the other player, Hayate, who's at number 4, he has a prompt on his screen that's talking about the cat. So he's saying, you better feed the cat. And hopefully G-Min will hear him, and once she taps on the cat, she'll find out what she needs in order to feed the cat. Prototype testing's gone very well. It's an engaging game. It's got a great level of sort of chaos to it because everybody's talking at the same time and at the same time as they're listening. So quite a bit of fun, and it's an engaging game. And in terms of fitting the curriculum, it does that reasonably well because there's a variety of different contexts in which you do this, and the game progresses, becomes more and more difficult. We're looking at a very low, easy version of the game, or easy level in the game. Unfortunately, it's a great, big, huge, unwieldy game, and it's going to cost several $100,000 to develop. And the only way that I'd be able to develop this game is if I can secure a grant, like a SBIR grant, which is actually, I designed the game for a grant proposal that I didn't get. So, we can design things for the curriculum, but then, if they're too big, then we can't build them. Maybe a good thing, actually, now that Chromebooks are popular, because maybe if I built it last year, I wouldn't even be able to distribute it. Maybe that's sour grapes. Let's go to case study number 3. So this is a smaller game that I'm working on now. It's called Secret Agent. This is a reading fluency game. My goal with this game is to develop a game in which the players in a context in which they would naturally have to read very quickly. And hopefully in an engaging fashion. And what happens in this game is you are the secret agent, and across a variety of levels that take place in different contexts, you have to identify Dr. Evil and his evil minions before they can enact their nefarious scheme. And in this case, you're riding on the train, and they're going to pull a heist on the target, Dr. Jones, when they get to the tunnel. So you have a limited amount of time that you have to solve this puzzle of who they are. and where they're sitting. And the way that you do this is by hacking into Dr. Evil's text message service and reading the communication between him and his evil minions. And some of that communication, it's all encrypted, and some of it is garbled when it comes out. So you have to guess words that don't come out in the message. So there's this close activity to it. And of course, you have to read very quickly and comprehend it in order to make judgments about who they are and where they're sitting. So in this case, the player has read through this part and has been able to identify who the target is, Dr. Jones. It's a smaller game. Again, it works well in prototype testing. It's fun, and I'm happy that I was able to develop a integrated theme and mechanic. So it feels very natural to be forced to read very quickly. And it took quite a bit of time to figure out a game in which I could do this. Does it fit in anybody's curriculum? Probably not. Would teachers be able to use it in a classroom? Maybe some teachers somewhere. I think it might be viable as a direct-to-end user game, so not being sold through an education system. But now I'm facing that dilemma of, do I spend the money to develop this when there's no proven market for these direct-to-end user games? So those have been my experiences designing for the language learning classroom, and I'd like to talk about some of these things that I think we need to do, the developers need to do, if they really want to be successful in this market. So again, what we really have to concentrate on is making this piece fit the education system puzzle. So a couple of things that I think will work. Number one, small, focused, tight games are better than big, immersive games. Obviously, a lot easier to develop, but also because they're a lot easier for teachers to use in the classroom. I love games. I play games. I design games. I develop games, and I don't have any place in my curriculum for any of those wonderful communicative-based games that I was talking about earlier. Right? So have to make small games that take 10 minutes, games that take 15 minutes, games that you can pick up and put down. Number two, obviously design for the curriculum. And this is particularly difficult because if you instrumentalize games for the purpose of something else, most of the time you break the game. And this is this sort of lesson we've learned from watching so many teachers design games instead of game designers. But that being said, the curriculum's not going to change. So we've got to find a way to get in there and do that. Number three, metrics. Everybody loves metrics because they are awesome. And games should absolutely positively make the teacher and the administrator's life easier by allowing them to get data and make formative assessments on their students' progress. And this is where classroom games like Kahoots, which I should have put a screenshot in there of, work really well. This is where Socrative works really well. And this is what we need to do. We can't make games that are are a burden for teachers to use. We have to include tools in our games that make them easier and make the teacher's time, allow teachers to use their time more efficiently. User-generated content trumps developers' content. What that means is we've got to find a way for teachers and even language learners to create that content that goes in the game. It has to have flexibility. These games have to have flexibility so that teachers can put them into whatever unit they're doing, right? Rather than creating a unit around the game, which I love to do, and it's fun to do, but it isn't practical in most cases. And then finally, communicate through the game rather than with the game. That is, games are not able to make good assessments of language use other than, really, really simple assessments. Did you spell this word correctly? Did you use a noun when you were supposed to use a noun? Players are always engaged by other players, and when we can be communicating through the game and interacting with other players, and the game is the context in which this interaction happens, not only are you creating great engagement, but you're lessening your content load. There's less there that you have to create if the players are creating that inside their own heads or with each other. This is how I learned to stop worrying and love the quiz. And I have one more project to show you, and that's it. My current project is a game called Kokoro, and it looks like this. It's a it can be played asynchronously, so players play at different times, but preferably synchronously between two players. You can see Annabelle and Bobbable are the players in this game, and it's a quiz game. The questions at the top there: which of these animals have fins? And they race to choose the correct answer the fastest. And this comes out of a long line of similar games. You might know of Song Pop, which is quite popular a few years ago, which is basically a Name That Tune game where you hear a snippet of a song and you try to name that tune faster than your opponent does. And more recently, Quiz Up, which is a trivia quiz game. And this game is leading the education stores in all of the English-speaking countries. Very popular, very good. It also relies on user-generated content, and it's mostly trivia. What's funny, if you haven't played these games, they're much more engaging than they may look right here. It's amazing how you can have a topic that is as ridiculous as hardwood flooring and be really passionate about, getting that answer before your random partner can answer it first. And those games are not particularly, they're not suited for a variety of reasons. They're not suited for language learning or necessarily for an education context, but they can be. And so this is what I set out to do, is design a social quiz game specifically for language learners. This is how it plays. And you go through a series of rounds, and hopefully you can answer questions faster than your partner can, or your opponent can. It's got a variety. It's got a variety of functions that allow teachers to use it, and hopefully will drive user acquisition. So the first is connect. So you can play against your partners in the classroom. You can play against your classmates outside of class. Play against your friends, or you can play against people around the world. And the game really sets you up to engage with other people around the world through the chat message service that's also attached to the game. As I said, it's the competitive part of it that drives the engagement. In the game, you collect vocabulary sets that are either sort of standard run-of-the-mill vocabulary lists, most important verbs, or AWL lists, but also trivia. So it's got both sides of it. So you can go in and answer questions about Harry Potter or Game of Thrones, or celebrities, or you can concentrate on your core vocabulary. It's got features that allow you to collaborate in some games with people, so that you can work with somebody and have a context out of which communication can happen. Because the biggest problem that foreign language learners face is there are people all over the world that they communicate with in English, but they don't really have a reason to. So this game has the app has another game in it that allows you to collaborate, give you that incentive to meet people and talk to people. And it has user-generated content. So teachers can make vocabulary sets out of whatever they're doing and push them out to their students. Other players can make their own sets, whether it's their own study tools, or if it's for maybe just a set, just to play around with questions about your friends, or where you live, or hobbies, or something like that. But mostly the reason for this is to allow teachers to be able to use whatever they're doing in the classroom and put it right into this game. And the flip side of that is that they can get metrics from the students, so they can find out how many matches they played, their success rate, their speed in answering the questions, and they can use those for formative assessments. And this is also, it's for me right now, it's a little bigger than I can chew. It's a larger game, but I'm hopeful that it finally, after 5 years, I've gotten to this point where I can be confident that I've got a design that will work inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And that's how I learned to stop worrying and love the quiz. So that's it. Thank you very much, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, you can write them down below or shoot me an email here. Thanks.